So, I've been on a huge Planet of the Apes kick lately. It's one of my favourite franchises by now, and the Caesar trilogy has always been my favourite trilogy of all time. And at the beginning of the year, I did my top 20 most anticipated movies of the year, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was third, so very safe to say I was hyped for this film. I was there opening night, I lost sleep when I had to go to work the next morning just to see this movie, and so was it all worth it? Was the hype justified? Was the tired Friday worth every lost moment of the nighttime hallucinations? Yeah, I think so, kinda. Now don't get me wrong, I loved this movie. I think it was exceptional, and I have it quite high on my Planet of the Apes franchise ranking, but is it better than any of the Caesar trilogy? Not at all. I will be comparing these movies quite a bit because, well, they're connected. This is a start of a new trilogy, sure, but a lot of this film has to do with the last three movies thematically and directly ties into their narrative. But this film does have its own identity. It brings a lot of new ideas to a franchise 10 films in, and though it references its predecessors quite a lot, which granted this franchise has always done, it does feel like new ground is being trod on. For example, I love the ideas of the clans, how that since taking over the planet, the apes have separated and evolved and mostly forgotten where they came from, so preoccupied with breaking new ground, being individual, being new, moving forward, having something of their own that they completely lose their way through lack of record keeping. They explore how their elders have taught them that the laws they live by came from them, not through willful deceit but through innocent ignorance. They have become so far removed from Caesar that his existence, his teachings are a shadow under their trees, which is a central theme of the film. They make it clear that's the intention from the very beginning, as the opening sequence is Caesar's funeral. The decision to make this the immediate thing you witness in the film is so smart because it instantly shows you that his death impacts this story. I have said many times that the first thing you see in a movie, the opening shot, the opening sequence, is the most important thing in that movie because the audience are going to latch onto whatever that is. That will determine what the tone is. It will determine what the movie is about for the rest of the film, and they expertly choose a great opening sequence for this because it's powerful imagery, plus it emotionally ties in with the rest of the franchise. It reminds people where we are, but it's important to this story specifically also. People's legacy begins when they die, so it's imperative to see that because Kingdom is all about Caesar's legacy and how it's been forgotten or twisted depending on where you are or who you talk to. Also, I hope we'll see that burial ground soon, see if it's some kind of forgotten Holy Land. I think it could be nice and would be akin to revisiting Caesar's home in Dawn. Now, the effects of the film are stunning. There are moments where they feel a bit plasticky, but in general, especially on Raqqa, the CGI models on the performance capture is stellar. I will concede that War for the Planet of the Apes to me is still the bar and by very far the best use and look of performance capture to date. Along with the character models, we of course have the performers, and though I think this overall cast is weaker than the previous, it's a very solid cast and we get some great performances. Peter Macon as Raqqa steals every scene he's in and plays the character of an orangutan who's from a clan that wants to keep Caesar's real message alive. He continues his teachings, and even though some of them have been misinterpreted or lost in direct meaning, they keep their soul. Kevin Durand as Proximus Caesar, the character who misconstrues all Caesar's teachings for personal gain, the main antagonist of the film, is on fire. He is so enigmatic and sinister, the complete opposite of Caesar himself. Durand plays it expertly, and with Abigail also being my second favourite of the year so far, just behind this, he's having a great year. Owen Teague, who plays Noah, is doing a pretty good job, but to state the obvious, is doing nowhere near as great as Andy Serkis was, but that was an inevitability. The best he could do is put his own spin on his character, which he does, which the movie in general does. I like that Noah isn't just a Caesar ripoff. He's not a leader we've seen before. He's not even really a born leader like Caesar was. Caesar had strength, he was sizable, he was commanding, he had incredible compassion and empathy, but that was never mistaken for weakness. At least not by anyone he didn't prove otherwise to. Noah is a lot more gentle, naive. He shares an empathy for his people the same as Caesar, but his greatest asset that he can offer them is his mind. He's curious, invested, open. When Caesar is confronted with his first ape threat in Colba, their difference in ideologies causes them to fight physically, and Caesar wins, but Noah is confronted by two apes, Silver and Proximus, both of which he stands no chance of beating physically, so both times he uses his brain to defeat the enemy. It's great writing and helps us avoid the landmine of just retreading Caesar's arc. The rest of the cast is great too. William H. Macy, Lydia Peckham, Travis Jeffrey. My only real gripe with the casting is Freya Allen as May, simply because I cannot believe someone with this face grew up in a wasteland or even in a bunker. This is the face of a person who knows what an iPhone is. This is the face of someone who has a TikTok, you know what I mean? She has such a Gen Z face that I feel so disconnected from her story because she can't convincingly play anyone outside like the 21st century. And this film does a good job at showing us how much time has passed too, so it really is distracting. There's a lot of good world building, and though I think it sorely loses the visual style of Reeves because Wes Ball just doesn't have the same juice, he does build a good environment. This world truly feels distant. It's come a very long way from Rise. There's a lot of urban apocalypse imagery that was also present in Wes Ball's Maze Runner trilogy, and you can see he learned a lot from that and applied it here. Also in line with his Maze Runner trilogy, the action is super gritty and intense, easily the greatest asset of this film, whereas in the earlier films, though the action was stellar, it was the drama and character writing that stood out the most, which I think shows this film's most fatal flaw, the writing. Though I have praised it so far, there are so many glaring issues with it for me. First of all, I think writer Josh Friedman is just weaker than Matt Reeves, Amanda Silver, Rick Jaffa and Mark Bombach, who all worked on the previous three. They wrote an incredibly poetic story full of allegories, metaphors, philosophical and moral debates, arcs that span over lifetimes, and they took what the previous films in the franchise had touched on and made a Shakespearean experience whilst moulding a Moses figure out of Caesar. This film just lacks a lot of that character writing, a lot of that oomph. Noah is a serviceable protagonist, but nowhere near as exciting or full of obvious potential like Caesar was, and I understand that I'm comparing one film to a trilogy, but even just in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, or in Just Dawn, or in Just War, there's more in it for Caesar than there is Noah in this. He's just not as compelling. The antagonist in Proximus is also almost wasted, a great performance with some great ideas put behind him, but they aren't delved in deeply enough to feel like it's moving the ground the way Koba did. The concept of a king, generations later, twisting the ideologies of a past king, the lawgiver, the savior, should be huge and grand. It is thematically so rich and they barely do anything with it but point it out once or twice. They don't even bring it up to Proximus himself that he's besmirched the name of Caesar. The movie almost feels like we're watching a prequel to a film that already exists. It's much better than The Phantom Menace, but it does have a lot of that same bone structure, which is an odd feeling to start a trilogy with set further in the story than we've seen thus far. It's near enough 2.5 hours and it still feels like it didn't do enough. I understand there's more movies to come, but there just feels like there's a lot of gaps in this narrative specifically. But before it sounds like I hate this movie, a reminder, I loved this movie. I'm just disappointed in certain aspects of it and particular choices. Dan Murrell said that this film exceeded his expectations and also realised his greatest fears, which I think is an excellent way to put it. I hope the trilogy and the further movies in this 9-film franchise they just announced they're planning on doing expands on Caesar's teachings through discovery, because this film does very well to sell us a promise of a greater movie to come, which is one of its bigger problems for me personally. It doesn't work alone all that well, despite having full arcs. They leave just a little that requires another experience to be added on, whereas even Rise can be a complete experience by itself. It sells no promise of a future, but leaves enough of a gap of one if it happened, which it did. Same for the original movie and even the Tim Burton one, which of course spawned no sequels but very well could have, but still doesn't feel like an incomplete story like this one would if no sequels were to come. This is typically a problem with the second movie in a trilogy, like Across the Spider-Verse, but it somehow has become part of the first installment in this trilogy. I will say on one final happy note though, I thought they were going to reveal that May comes from the tribe of freak psychic humans from beneath the Planet of the Apes, especially when she headed to that shelter at the end, but luckily they didn't do that. So overall, I think Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is an exceptional movie that brings me a great amount of hesitance. But that's just me. Have you seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes? If so, what did you think? If not, why? And whether it's a start of a new trilogy in a reboot series from one of Hollywood's oldest franchises or not. As always, keep watching movies.